Let's turn to our mega panel. Karen, Susan, and Jimmy are here. What is your immediate reaction to this news, Karen?
Well, assuming that it's true, which it sounds like now we're more confident that it is, this is great news, hopefully, for the Libyan people. I think, obviously, this is a starting point, an end of one thing, but a starting point which is on what's going to be a very long road for them. I also, of course, think of it in political terms, that here again, I think the president and his administration and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and the rest of the foreign policy team had the right judgment in not taking a cookie-cutter approach to Libya and understanding how important it would be that if we got to this point, that this victory would be from the Libyan people, not because the United States came in and big-footed. And
the interesting thing, Jimmy, as somebody who obviously is a vicious critic of this administration on banking and healthcare and all this sort of domestic policy, this has to be very good politically for the Obama camp and the President Obama's leadership team to be able to pin up Muammar Gaddafi next to Osama bin Laden and just sort of run down that list after having watched both George W. Bush and Dick Cheney under the sort of real saber-rattling of the Republican Party on all the tough guy stuff. And then it's the guy from Harvard's picking off all the bad guys. It's got to feel pretty good for them, I bet.
Well, quiet diplomacy always gets it across the goal line way faster than exposing your muscles and your pecs and acting like a badass, which usually doesn't work. We all remember when the president went on the carrier and said mission accomplished. Really? I think Obama accomplished most of the mission. However, I would suggest to the 30 million people in the United States of America who don't have work or are underemployed that they really don't give a damn about Muammar, I can't say his name, Gaddafi. They would like to know what's happening domestically. This president, who I love the guy. I voted for him. I'll probably vote for him again. He gets an A++++ on foreign affairs. And at this point in time, I'm having a hell of a time giving him a C- on domestic affairs. Not because it's all his fault. I would suggest to you that his pupils in his classroom aren't helping him. That would be the Republican Congress and part of the Democratic Congress. But the American people want him to focus nation inward. It's time to focus here.
And that's why it gets really interesting, because in a different climate, with a different unemployment situation, with a different relationship with the banking sector, with a different relationship with our with a different relationship with our own country, points like this overseas you would think would create an incredible way of going into a presidential election, and it doesn't necessarily feel like that is in play at all.
Well, it'd be really hard for him to go into the presidential election with this with the Bush policies, frankly, as foreign affair policy. So that's really, he's kind of caught in between. Do I want to deal with a bad economy or basically changing my foreign affairs positions from when I ran last time?
But can they translate the success? Can the Democratic leadership hearken back not just to this, but to their success overseas in a way that in any way benefits them politically? And how do they reconcile that with the obviously domestic turmoil?
Well, look, a couple of things. I mean, number one, let's remember that this was a military action where, because we were engaged with the Arab nations and NATO, we didn't have boots on the ground. No American lives were lost. This has cost us nearly nothing in compared to Iraq and Afghanistan, and yet it was important for America's safety and security. So, I mean, again, I think there is something to be said for this is a model, this and what we saw happening in Egypt, for maybe how we engage with the world, where we keep our costs down. Frankly, I think that's important.
But that wasn't an answer to my question. My question was, Jimmy, there's obvious politics that are beneficial if you are a president who gets the bad guy. And yet this is a president who has done a better job of getting the bad guy than almost any president in recent memory. And yet it appears that the currency that holds for him politically, because of the domestic situation, is limited at best.
I want to remind everyone that when Bill Clinton was president, every time he went down in the polls, we all of a sudden found ourselves engaged in some sort of military action overseas, Serbia, Croatia, wherever it was, right? And every time the Republicans criticized him and they said, oh, he's bombing people for political purposes. To answer your question, it is politics. It's also world politics. And again, he's got an A+ in politics in the world. I would like for him to at least get a C+ or a B domestically.
But Dylan, if I could just, I guess
Quick.
the point that I was trying to make is that this is an area where President Obama, without the Republicans having anything to do with it, we saw this is his leadership. This is what he and his team were able to accomplish when we let them do what they're here to do. And they were able to do it in a way that kept our costs down, which is better for our economy than Iraq and Afghanistan that George Bush ran us into.
Right.
So my point is there is an argument to be made about his leadership that is very relevant to how he is handling the rest of his job.
Sometimes he can lead and do things without the Republicans, but when things aren't going his way, he has to blame the Republicans and say he can't lead because the Republicans are getting in the way. I mean,
because they were getting in the way, Susan, because they blocked everything.
Yeah. Or you're suggesting that in the case of the banks, that he just didn't want to lead and reform those banks, right? That was he's a great leader and just didn't want to lead on the banks.
Well, why in God's name
we could
would
do
you
this
cut
all day? We could do it all day. We could do it all day.
Why would you cut off your campaign funding, for God's sake? That would just be ludicrous.
That's no way to run a campaign, is it, Jimmy?
No.